you live in the urban core and you live in Uptown, Capitol Hill, or Golden Triangle, in any of those neighborhoods, then I am your city council person. And so just a little bit about me. I was inaugurated in July of 2019. So this is my first term of my first time of ever being an elected official. So this is somewhat new to me. And if you're here for City Council 101, maybe it's a little, the process is a little new to you as well. So thank you for coming. I am also hashtag breaking barriers. I'm the first elected official in Denver's history who uses a wheelchair for mobility. So local, state, or federal, we've never had someone serve using a wheelchair for mobility. And they actually had to make changes to City Hall, the City Council chambers, and it was 29 years after 80 was passed. So great, it was time. Although this is my first time being an elected official, it's not my first foray into politics. Before I was elected, I was an advocate for the disability community at the state level for years. I had the wonderful privilege of having a law named after me. In May of 2018, Governor Hickenlooper signed the Chris Hines Act into law, and I thought to myself, well, geez, since I'm going to name laws after me as a private citizen, imagine what I could do as an elected official. Well, we don't have to imagine anymore. So I believe our democracy is stronger when we all participate, and I also believe our democracy is stronger when our elected bodies reflect the people they represent. So hopefully that's why you're here today. I actually wasn't originally on the program, so I want to give Downtown Denver Partnership an extra thank you, because I just saw the email go through and I was like, I want to help. So I am going to turn that off. That's how things work, right? Let's see. Okay. So as you hopefully know, 81% of Colorado voters participated in November's election. That's the highest turnout of any state in any election in the history of our republic. So that shows that people are angry. People want change, and I believe that's why I was elected. But it also means that people are now engaged in our political process that have never been engaged in the civic discourse ever before. So it kind of shows sometimes with some of the constituent outreach that we get. So no offense to those who are reaching out. I'm really excited that people are. I'm also really excited that we have programs like this to help get people up to speed with the process. I know that baby boomers are well engaged, and that's at least partly because they had civics classes when they were growing up, and it was an important topic when they were children. And these days we don't get civics as necessarily as a core function of school. So it's time we get more people up to speed with the process, and that way, again, our democracy better represents the people. So, speaking of that, there's a bit of a disparity between District 10, the people in District 10, and the people who are politically active in District 10. So the median age of District 10 is actually under 37. It's about 36.7 years old. Cap Hill, that one neighborhood alone has about 25% of the residents who live in District 10. Oh, and I should mention the boundaries. So District 10 is basically Colfax, Colorado, and Spear, and also the statistical neighborhood of North Capitol Hill, commonly referred to as Uptown. But the median age of District 10 is 36.7, and the median age of the most populous neighborhood in District 10, Capitol Hill, is 31. But the median age of the District 10 person who is engaged in the political process is much older. I would say a generation older, and also it kind of shows we have in law, in Denver ordinance, the official way the city interacts with the people and hears from them, so shares information with the people and hears back, is through a process called the Registered Neighborhood Organization. And And it also shows the disparity of the median age and the median age of the person politically engaged. The median age of the person who participates in most of the registered neighborhood organizations in the city is quite a bit older. So there you go. So I hope that you I hope that you get involved. I hope you get engaged. That's why we have City Live Live in this case, and that's why we have the idea of durable movements. So we want to make sure that we have people who are engaged in organizations that withstand the test of time, or in my case, withstand the test of time. But you get the idea. And so some durable movements of the major political parties that are out there, but there are also similar organizations like the Sierra Club, or I don't want to name all the organizations because that would take forever. I don't want to name some of the organizations because then I'll miss one, but you get the general idea. So I'm really excited to have some of our legislative analysts here. Actually, it looks like Emily joined. So we've got all the legislative analysts that work with City Council here today, and so I think my next I don't know, Brent, you want me to hand it back to you and then you'll hand it over?
Sure, I'm happy to turn it over to the City Councilman. Thank you so much. I also just want to take the opportunity to remind everyone that we're really aiming to have a respectful conversation here. And so while all of the participants can't see the questions that are coming in, there are quite a few that are unfortunately quite disrespectful. And I would just ask that those comments stop. So thank you very much. And with that, thanks again, Councilman. And with that, I'll turn it over to Zach, John, and Emily.
Great, thanks, Brett. So as Councilman Hines mentioned, we are the nonpartisan objective staff for City Council. So that means we work for all 13 council members. Happy to do so and work in a nonpartisan fashion. We are essentially the human part of the institution. If you want to look at the building as the physical part, we are there depending, whoever comes in, if it gets elected, we're the body. So we're happy to help out council members with what they want, whether that's developing policy, whether it's outreach. We're also always happy to come to neighborhood organizations, the TDP, and kind of do these presentations to help people engage in the city in a more efficient manner. Myself, I'm Zach Rothmeyer. I'm a senior analyst there. I've been with City Council since, I think, 2014. Prior to that, I worked at various state legislatures, the Oregon legislature, the Colorado legislature. I did a short stint at the United Nations, and then spent about 4 years in the Department of Interior under the Obama administration. But I'd like to hand over to my colleagues. They can introduce themselves, and I'll get the presentation underway.
I'll go next. Hi, I'm Emily Lapel. I am a legislative policy analyst with Denver City Council. I've been working for the city and county of Denver for 4 years. I started off as an aide for Council District 9 with Councilman Elvis Brooks, and then I went to central staff about 2 years ago. So it's been a really fun and educational journey for myself. I have a master's degree in criminal justice policy from the London School of Economics. Prior to that, I served as an AmeriCorps Vista, and I was a Fulbright scholar as well. So super happy to be focusing on municipal government and the wonderful world that it is.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is John Mahoney. I'm the newest member of our central staff trio here. I joined City Council staff last April. So it's certainly been an interesting first year on the job, as I'm sure you can all imagine. But very happy to be with City Council as the city has faced the many opportunities and challenges presented over the last 9 months to a year. Prior to joining City Council, I was over at the National Conference of State Legislatures, which is based here in Denver, up in the old Lowry Air Force Base. And when I was at NCSL, I worked as a senior policy specialist with a focus on strengthening the legislative institution and analyzing state legislative elections. So yeah, very happy to be here this afternoon. Thank you all for the opportunity to come talk to you for a little bit about City Council.
All right, so I think we'll start our presentation, and let me me see if I can, let me show on the other side of this. If we can share the right screen, that would be great. Everybody looks good? All right, I see some thumbs up. So Denver City Council, as you know, Denver has a council, a mayor, there's a couple other elected positions, the auditor, the city clerk. But today we're going to focus on essentially Denver and Denver City Council and how to engage. So Denver's been around for a while. It's a home rule municipality under the Colorado Constitution. Doesn't mean much, but what that does mean is that it has certain freedoms to do what they want to do, essentially. So if you're not a home rule municipality, it's easier to explain that you can only do what the state has allowed you to do. So express powers are enumerated for non-home rule municipalities. Whereas home rule municipalities, as long as it's not conflicting with state law, can typically govern as they please. So Article 3, Part 2 of the Denver Charter outlines what the specific powers are for Denver City Council. Those passing ordinances, zoning, it doesn't specifically say zoning, but it is land use. Appropriations, that includes the budget, contracts, temporary permits, and referred measures. So we'll go into a little bit what that looks like. So City Council has the ability to pass ordinances. They can initiate them, but 99% of everything that comes forward comes from the mayor's office, and I'll explain a little bit why that is in a moment. But they can make laws and impose fines. I put an asterisk up there because there's a caveat there. And I'll go into strong mayor form of government shortly, but council can only make laws and impose fines on what other administrative bodies do not have explicit power over. For example, in the charter, DOTI, so the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, actually has charter authority over the right-of-way. So if Councilman Hines would like to go and regulate how parking works, he cannot do that because council does not have purview over the right-of-way. So that kind of forces an interaction between the administrative bodies and the mayor's administration as well as council to figure out how those policies move forward. Zoning, this is the majority of what you'll see on a Monday night. Land use, obviously, Denver is growing exponentially. That includes development and rezoning. So there's kind of two different ways that the body sits as a quasi-judicial body. And what that means is that they are making the ultimate decision. They are the adjudicator for the applicant that wants to change the zoning or any change to the zoning code. So, for example, last Monday night, the administration brought forward in concert with a few council members an amended version of the group living ordinance. That would fall in the latter. So it's a text amendment to the zoning code, but because it does affect land use, council gets to sit as a quasi-judicial body for that. But more often what you're going to see is a plot of land just down the street that somebody either wants to build, say a guest house out back to rent out to their in-laws. Or, in the case of downtown Denver, more likely it's going to be a large apartment complex or mixed-use development is typically what you see downtown. Downtown does have its own zoning code, but that's really just around the 16th Street Mall area. But up into 5 Points, obviously with the growth up there, it creeps north a little bit. And so, for example, last week in the Land Use and Transportation Committee, we had Harkins Court rezoning. This is phase 4 or 5 of the project that is looking to go in there. It's been fairly contentious as it moves forward. They have to apply and get council approval for each phase of that project to move forward. One of the phases did not move forward on council authority. So, majority of what you're going to see on Monday night are going to be those hearings. Those hearings do involve anybody who wants to speak up. So, if you ever want to weigh in, if it's in your neighborhood or even if it's not, we will hear you. And by we, I mean council. I make no decisions. I just help them with theirs. So they will listen to everybody who wants to speak on those, and that's as opposed to a courtesy public hearing, which I'll also go into shortly. That's our budget and appropriation authority. So every year, the mayor puts forward a suggested budget. Council will give their input on that budget and say what they'd like to change. The mayor can either accept those changes or reject those changes. And then when the budget comes up, council can either vote to amend the budget and hope that they have a veto-proof 9-vote majority or reject the budget. This year, they got pretty much, I think, everything they asked for. Something like $4 million in additional funding for projects the council had identified need for. Then along with that is any appropriation. So this will probably come into fruition in 2021 because we don't know what the economic outlook is necessarily going to be like for the city. So in a year where, say we're budgeting, use round numbers for $1 billion and say, 1.1 billion comes in revenue, Denver is de-bruised, and so we can use that revenue, but the mayor's administration cannot use that revenue unless it is appropriated by council. And council now, since thanks to the voters last November, has the ability to actually initiate those appropriations mid-year cycle. So prior to that, council could only appropriate money if it was something put forward by the mayor's office. So now council, if there are excess funds, could initiate an appropriation measure themselves. Contracts. So this is a big one. This is what you usually see on the consent agendas. Anything that's over a $500,000 contract gets approval by city council. This has been the same threshold since 1982. You can imagine what inflation has done to that. So subsequently, council looks at about 1,200 of these a year. Temporary permits. So council does not have purview of the right of way, but they do have a say in how it's used. And so if, for example, on 16th Street Mall, Hard Rock Cafe wants to put a patio out there, now you have to get council approval for that encroachment to the right of way. And so, construction sites, if they need a temporary encumbrance to block off the street for an extended period of time, that goes to council authority as well. Shorter temporary permits do not need council authority, but any encumbrances, even cell towers, that sort of thing, some of that's governed by state law, but they have a say in what goes in the encumbrances in the public domain. Also includes parkland. And then lastly, but certainly not least, are referred measures. You may remember a couple of years ago, council put forward a measure to the voters to ask them to fund 0.25% for a parks tax that passed last year, and that was the first referred measure from council in a number of years. Last year, I think there were actually a selection cycle. There were 7, 8. John and Emily may be able to weigh in on the exact amount, but so council is putting forward a lot more referred measures now that gives you as the voters the ability to make those decisions for the city. So as I mentioned before, Denver's a strong mayor form of government. And that doesn't mean that Hancock can bench press more than our staff. It just means that they have a little more power enumerated to them. So in the actual charter, the powers are, the parks director has authority over parkland, or the director of the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure has authority over infrastructure, streets, right-of-way, as I mentioned earlier, or the Department of Safety. That person has specifically enumerated powers in charter that gives them authority over the police force. And so during last summer, when council wanted to make some sweeping changes, they don't have a key ability to make those changes without working with the administration. So it does force both parties to come to the table if they want anything. But really where council's power lies with the budget. So if their ideas are rejected, council can say, well, we're just not going to fund those. So you do have a little bit more authority in that sense. So most of the city are run by those administrative agencies. There are some non-charter agencies, I believe, excising licenses. So our marijuana policy, I don't believe, is a charter agency. Then we also have enterprise funds. So the airport takes in its own revenue through gate fees and concession agreements. So they're self-funded. So they have a little more freedom on how they act and how they manage the airport. There's also some other enterprise funds. So golf courses. We provide give a contract to a provider, but they have to be revenue neutral. So the parks general fund budget does not have to pay for the golf courses. The revenue that those golf courses brings in pays for the golf courses. And then there's a lot of city-ish organizations. So not necessarily part of the city or the city structure and charter, but the city has a lot of involvement in them. So these stuff like the art museum, the SCFD fund, so that's like the other museums, the Denver Zoo, for example. But also things that are not quite as fun as that, like Dura and some other agencies that are state-led or federal that have to work intimately with how Denver operates. The nitty-gritty, council structure. We have 11 districts in Denver. Councilman Hines is, as you mentioned, Capitol Hill. Councilman Tulabaca is downtown Denver. And we also have 2 at-large that represent the entire city. So these districts have been essentially static since 1971, and so you can imagine the population difference in the last 50 years. So their jobs get harder, but they don't get more support to do those. So, I guess in 1971, you're looking at probably 40,000 person districts. I believe Councilman Hines and Councilman Baca have about 75 to 80,000 in their districts at this point. By charter, we get 4 weeks off a year. They can call other weeks off, which they've done on occasion, but typically it's just the Independence Day, Memorial Day, Labor Day, and then a week at the end of the year. Otherwise, they meet every Monday for those Monday night meetings. Subsequently, Monday night meetings are the only thing that's really required of council members to do, but their scope of authority has grown obviously over the years. They've very good at constituent services, as well as developing policy and passing legislation. Council members are allowed 3 terms. They can be 3 terms as a district, and then they would also be eligible to run at large. So Councilwoman Ortega was a district councilwoman for a number of years, took a short hiatus, and now she's back, and she's in her 3rd term as a council member at large. You have to clear 50%, otherwise it goes to a runoff. Typically, District 10, Councilman Hines will have no less than 10 opponents on any given year. But the offices run autonomously, so Councilman Hines is in charge of hiring his aides do their budgeting, and all the other council districts run that way as well. So the actual organization of council, it's not quite as stringent as you see the federal, especially with the impeachment proceedings going on. The council internally does elect the president each July. By tradition, nothing's written down, but the presidents have typically served 2-year terms. Again, that is tradition, so anybody that would want to run against Councilwoman Gilmore next July could certainly do that, and there's nothing prohibiting that. There's also a pro tem, which will serve in the absence of the president. The president, in addition to being the face of council and running the meeting on Monday night, they also decide the structures of the committees, as well as the chairs of those committees. When I first started, there were 6 committees. Now there are 4 with a committee of the whole as well, so 5 standing committees. So they choose those chairs and what each of those committees' jurisdiction is. We'll go into that in a little more detail in a moment. During committee, these meet during the day on Tuesdays and Wednesdays right now. Again, that's at the deference of the president. But the majority of the agenda what you'll see is a consent agenda, which is your typical run-of-the-mill contracts, cleaning services, infrastructure, that sort of thing. But then you'll have hearings on something that is a little more involved, especially stuff that's involved with the community. Emily will go over a little bit more how the safety committees look lately, because that's certainly taking in a lot of committee input. Typically, it's a 4-week process from the time that council gets the bill. So every Tuesday, council gets a handful of bills from the administration. I think this week we got about 20, but it's anywhere from 20 to 60 on any given week. The council members sort through those with the assistance of myself and our staff, and decide kind of what goes for hearing, what goes on consent, and help those move through the process. The president is also ex officio to each committee. So right now, each committee has 6 members, but the president does serve on those committees if she is present. And so that would make a majority 4, and so they would be the tiebreaker, and I guess it would be 7 with them, so it would be a tie. But if there's an absence, it's always helpful to have them there, and they do count for quorum. So council meeting, this is a little more prudent, because this is where your participation really shines. Public comment every Monday at 5 o'clock. So you can sign up and speak whatever you like. This is a good opportunity to address your council members. If they sit and listen, they don't respond, to give more time for folks to listen, but they often do respond offline. Council gavels in at 5:30. Typically, the order of operations are basically we'll do the Indigenous recognition along with the Pledge of Allegiance. Then we'll go to council announcements and any communications from the administration. We have proclamations, which are essentially honorary pieces of legislation. So if there's a community member who's really done outstanding work, a lot of times council members will like to highlight those members of the community. It's a good time for them to come down and get honored by council. And then we go into the public hearings after we vote on all the items prior to that. By rule, council committee meetings, public hearings cannot start before 6 o'clock. This allows more folks to come in and have the opportunity to speak to quasi-judicial or courtesy hearings. The difference between those two, so as I mentioned earlier, quasi-judicial are required by law and everybody gets to speak. The courtesy hearing is typically on something that would be controversial. So, body cameras for safety, some of those contracts where you're not necessarily talking about the contract as much as what that contract means. And those can be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. Sometimes we've let those go on longer than that. And that's all at the deference of the president as well. Council also has a unique power that I've never seen in any other legislative body, and that is to introduce legislation on the floor. So the council member, as long as they file it by Thursday at noon, can introduce any piece of legislation they want directly onto the floor. So they can force a vote on essentially anything they want. Because after that, they would, if it's after Thursday at noon, they would need to vote to suspend the rules to do a late filing. But it does give a lot of power to an individual council member if they ever wanted to introduce legislation that was on their own merit. So we'll go into a little bit with what the committees look like, and we'll try to finish up pretty quick, and happy to answer any questions you guys have. So start off with land use, infrastructure, and transportation, or refer to this as LUDI. This committee meets pretty much 48 weeks a year. This is every Tuesday, 10:30 in the morning, typically 1 to 3 zonings, also historic designations. So everything from Tom's Diner, which is a little more downtown oriented, to some like a chapel up in Berkeley, or some places over in Park Hill recently. So those also come to the land use committee. Councilmember Chris Herndon is the chair currently. He's the from District 8, which is over in Park Hill, Central Park. Vice chair is Councilwoman Sandoval. She's up in Northwest Denver. We also have, I won't read the names, but you guys can look down the list. Also put Stacey Gilmore on there because she is ex officio, so she does sit on all committees. So in the current rules, this is what LUDI's purview is over. So the majority is community planning and development, public works, and parks and rec. Our partners over at Denver Water, their legislation, if they need it, would also come through here, as well as our regional partners with CDOT's, RTD, and Dr. Cog. After that, on Tuesdays, we have finance and governance, meets at 1 in the afternoon. Sorry, that time is wrong on there. It's 1:30 in the afternoon until 3 o'clock. Right now, the chair is Councilwoman Kendra Black, and Rob Page, who's one of our large council members, sits on that as well as the vice chair. The majority of stuff that comes through FinGov is the mechanisms of the city, how it works. So it's accepting grants, it's accepting contracts, signing contracts. It's also mayoral appointees. All appointees that the mayor puts forward for boards and commissions go through FinGov. It's also our internal process. So if there was rule changes for city council, these would also go through their city attorney's office, human resources. So it's really the kind of nuts and bolts of city operations that go through FinGov, including tech services, which is always fun to sign contracts for routers or whatever they need. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Emily at this point. She can talk about the safety committee.
Thanks, Zach. So the Safety, Housing, Education, and Homelessness Committee meets on Wednesdays from 10:30 to 12. More often than not, though, we'll be starting at 10 just because we have a lot of topics, a lot of briefings, a lot of contracts that are coming through that are very important at this time with COVID and our civil rights reckoning. If you could go to the next slide. Thanks. So Councilman Paul Cashman of District 6 is the chair, and the vice chair is Councilmember Torres of District 3. Councilman Cashman, or as Zach mentioned earlier, every chair can design the committee structure kind of however they want, and Councilman Cashman enjoys having a lot of briefings, so he will want to connect with the agencies that are listed on the next slide and have them come in for briefings. So next slide, thanks. So for example, over the summer, we had a lot of briefings from the Department of Safety and DPD regarding their policies, their use of force. We had a lot of briefings as well from our office of HOST, which is our affordable housing office and stability. And they talk a lot about our affordable housing programs, our homeless solutions, and most recently we had a briefing from them and NEST, which is Neighborhood Equity Stabilization Task Force, on their anti-displacement policy measures. So just as Ludi has a lot of zoning stuff, we have a lot of briefings on these really incredibly important topics. But we also have a lot of contracts that come through as well for affordable housing projects, to again, homeless service contracts, to body cameras for the police and sheriff, and anything along the topics of safety, housing, education, and homelessness. It's a fun committee to staff, and I encourage you to tune in on Wednesdays if you can. And that's it. Thanks.
Cool. I will take over from there. Thank you, Emily. So I staff two committees, the first of which is the Business, Sports, Workforce, and Aviation Services Committee, which is a bit of a mouthful, so we usually just refer to it as BIZ. And then, Zach, if you could go to the next slide. So there are 6 members of this committee, plus Council President Gilmore. Our very own Councilman Hines is the Vice Chair of the committee, and then Councilman Kevin Flynn from Council District 2 in Southwest Denver is the Chair of the committee. Next slide, Zach. So, like the 3 aforementioned committees, Youth and Safety, BIZ is a legislative committee working with a variety of city departments and agencies to study and discuss proposed legislation before it proceeds to the council as a whole. As you can see here, BIZ works with 4 city departments: excise and licenses, arts and venues, the Office of Sustainability, and the Office of Economic Development, or DEDO. Additionally, BIZ also handles all of the legislation stemming from DIA, which, as Zach mentioned earlier, is an enterprise fund. There's also a handful of other entities that work with BIZ on occasion, including the Downtown Denver Partnership, Visit Denver, the Zoo, museums, and other cultural facilities. Go to the next slide, Zach. Thank you, sir. So I included this slide just to give you a sense of the type of legislation that BIZ looks at by providing some recent examples. So, for example, from the airport, of course, we have all things related to the Great Hall Project and all of the associated contracts. From DEDO, we have some of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act programs, including the Work Now program, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. From Arts and Venue, we have things like the Convention Center expansion project, which went through BIZ in fall. And then excise and licenses tends to be one of our quieter agencies, but they recently put forward an amendment to the short-term rentals. So that is BIZ. Moving on, the second committee I staff is Budget and Policy, which meets on Thursday mornings, so not this morning, 9:30 to 11. And unlike BIZ or any of the other committees we've mentioned, Budget and Policy is not strictly a legislative committee, but rather, as the name suggests, a policy committee. This means that unlike the other committees, which work with specific city agencies to move legislation through the process, Budget and Policy doesn't have legislative duties as such. Rather, the committee serves as a policy workshop and a briefing center, if you will, for council. Zach, do you want to pop on to the next slide? Thank you. So although previous iterations of this committee have existed in the past, this specific committee began last summer as part of the current council's desire to have a more active and involved role in analyzing the city's budget, hence the budget part of the name. But since the end of budget season back in November, December, the committee's functions, as I mentioned, is more of a workshop where council members can bring forward policy ideas and proposals and work them out with the group and have some discussion. A couple of quick examples. Councilman Sidabarka, last month, I believe, brought forward a policy proposal surrounding eviction defense. And then just this morning, Councilman Black from Council District 4 down in Southeast Denver. She brought forward a proposal aimed at reducing plastic waste by requiring customers to opt in for plastic cutlery and condiments when getting takeout or delivery. So lots of interesting topics. Changes a lot from week to week, so definitely worth tuning into that. And that is budget policy.
Great, thanks, Sean. Let me try to stop sharing my screen here. So we're happy to take questions. I'll hand over to Britt. But before we do, I did want to mention that City Council has been virtual since in some form of that since about March 17th last year. We were hybrid for a while. It didn't work out super hot. We've been virtual, but we are trying to figure out ways to kind of use what we've developed here with Zoom. We've had some great participation from the community on Zoom. And so just to let you know, we are working to figure out when we do go back in person, when this pandemic is done, ways to still get remote participation for folks. So we do have cushions on the chairs in the chamber now. It makes them a little more comfortable, but it can be a long night in there. So we are working on ways that you guys can still participate virtually, but always happy to receive suggestions and anything you guys have or ideas on how we can continue to increase that public engagement. I also want to thank the Downtown Partnership for their time, and as well as everybody who's logged into this for taking time out of your day to kind of learn a little bit more about civics, and happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Great. Thank you so much, Zach, and thank you, John and Emily and Councilman Hines. That was really a fabulous overview, and so appreciative again for your time. So we have quite a few questions here, so if I don't answer yours within the next 10 minutes or so, feel free to follow up with me. Happy to help get that question answered for you. I will also just say a lot of you asked about the wonderful PowerPoint that the City Council team just shared, and it sounds like we will be able to share a version of that. So we'll follow up with all attendees PowerPoint documents. So with that, let's jump into questions. So the first one is for Councilman Hines, and Sarah asked if you could describe how your perception of the role or certain aspects of local government might have changed since becoming. Really great question.
So thank you, Sarah, for participating, and thanks for your question. Yeah. So I grew up in rural Texas, and in Texas there's a school there, a university called Texas A&M, and they have a saying. It was originally a military college, and the saying for Texas A&M, the students there, they say, those on the outside can't understand it, and those on the inside can't explain it. And it's totally the case. Even as a candidate, I had no idea well, I had a little idea, but the difference of actually being an elected official versus what I thought my office would be is entirely different. So the experience is interesting because of now that I'm starting to understand the inner workings and how each committee works and how the process of how a bill becomes a law, like that schoolhouse rock thing from years ago. And it's a really interesting and complicated process, but it means meeting with a lot of people, and I don't know how people are candidates and elected officials at the same time. I mean, being a candidate was a full-time job, and being an elected official is way more of a job. So I don't know if that totally answers the question, but definitely it is a totally different world than what I was expecting.
So next question comes from an anonymous attendee, and this one is a really great question. So when a bill is approved in a committee to go before the full council, will the language or attributes of the bill change at all between approval at the committee level and when the full council votes on it?
Yeah, that is a good question. So only if it's noted in committee. So it would pass out or pass out as amended. And so the committees are not actual part of a legislative reading. So up at the State House, first reading is an actual committee. Denver operates a little different than that. So it's a little more, nothing is official until it's filed on that Thursday. but it won't change from committee if it's voted out of committee unless the council members have amended it. So they can either make those amendments by concept and then get the new language by the time it's filed, or just say that, hey, there's a typo on page 5, can we, fix that before it goes forward, and then vote out of committee. So it won't change, nothing of substance will change. It'd be pretty nefarious if it did between being voted out of committee and being filed, unless council has voted it out as amended.
Great, thank you so much. So we actually had a couple of different questions about the RNO process. Can anyone kind of speak to how RNOs fit into this engagement process that you all follow?
Sure, happy to take it. The RNO process is more of a mayor's administrative function. The RNO lists are kept by CPD. The RNO is registered with CPD. The outreach the council does, we have a mailing list. I think it goes out to all RNOs, anytime that we give the agendas and that sort of thing. I saw Emily's hand pop up, so I'm going to let her kind of chime in on that a bit.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I saw the question by, is there a list somewhere of the agencies that must notify RNOs? That list is actually in our municipal code, which you can find online. And it has a long list of all the different, and I can send it to you, Britt, has a long list of all the different reasons why RNOs need to be notified and how frequently they need to be notified. I apologize for any background information. I share an office with them. It's very helpful and interesting to go through that list. But like Zach said, you have to register with CPD to become an RNO, and then you are actually only notified within a specific geographic boundary. And so in your RNO sign up with CPD, you have a geographic boundary that you place, and only zoning applications or excise and license, like cabaret licenses, you'll only get notifications for that geographic boundary and not for the whole city.
And I should say, we use a lot of acronyms in the city. CPD is Community Planning and Development. We've been at this a while, and so it's secondhand to us, but that is the mayor's organization that is in charge of land use. So not only in charge of land use, but permits. So your construction inspections, your neighborhood inspections, as well as the zoning is all part of Community Planning and Development, which we just lovingly refer to as CPD.
Great, thank you both for that. So our next question comes from Carlin, who asks if you could explain a bit more the difference between an at-large council member versus a district council member.
Sure. So at-large represents the entire city. There are two of them, and so they're more policy focused, right? They're not necessarily answering constituents. We have a giant pothole in the middle of street here, so they're more trying to address some of the bigger picture issues, and have. Councilwoman Kanish has put forward an eviction defense program that was a pilot and now is fully funded by the budget every year. That's in the city and county building, and that helps get legal representation for folks facing eviction. Obviously going to be a big deal coming up this year. Nothing else coming up on top of my head, but the two at-large, are voted in by the entire city, just like the mayor, the auditor, and the clerk are. But they do focus on those bigger picture issues. Not to say that the district council members can't, but they have a million other things on their plate as well. And so the 9 districts, I did include, so when I get this presentation out to you guys, I did include the link to Denver's page. If you click on it, it'll show all 11 districts, and then you can look up any address, and it will tell you who's the council person for that district.
Great, thank you so much. So next question comes from Kenneth, and this is a really great question about the public comment process in general. So you mentioned that there is a general public comment session at the beginning of every city council meeting. First, how can you find out when and where you can sign up to testify? And also, if council doesn't directly respond to those comments, can you talk a little bit about how council does address the comments that they hear at public comment every week? I'm to paraphrase a little bit, but great question.
Yeah, that is a good question. And it's hard for me to answer because have, I refer to council because we, the three of us work for the entire body as council. I think to answer that question effectively, there are 13 different personalities up there and different ways that they approach their jobs. And so, some of them may, outreach to you. Some of them, maybe focused on a different set of issues, or they're only focused on answering folks that are in their district. That is to say, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And so try everything you can. Come to the public comments, sign up for the required public hearings to talk about the bill. On the required public hearings, you do have to talk about the bill, or you can be gobbled down, just general rules of procedure. But that general public comment from 5 to 5:30 is great, and I don't think it ever hurts to follow up with an email or a direct call or communication to a certain council member you're trying to address. I'd also like to take Councilman Hines to address this a little bit too, as a sitting council member, maybe how he addresses it or how he sees that as outreach.
Yeah, thank you. I was hoping to field the question as well. So part of the as I mentioned in the introduction, it's important that we all get involved and engaged. And when I was elected, it's crazy that I was just elected a year and a half ago. But when I was elected a year and a half ago, there were only opportunities for public comment twice a month, and they were not recorded. They weren't broadcast on Channel 8. And so we have already passed 2 new laws. The first was to make public comment before every council meeting, and the second was to televise those meetings. And so it was kind of an interesting discussion that wasn't unanimous. So the way I treat public comment, my office gets between 300 and 1,000 emails a day, and it's thanks to budget reductions. We had to reduce staff in our office, so it's me and I have 2 team members, and so it is very difficult for us. It's impossible for us to respond to every email that we receive. We read them, and I see. I think it's important for me to listen in a bunch of different ways. So we also use social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. We have a website. We have the official Denver Gov website. But public comment is yet another way for people to have their concerns heard. And so if I recognize many of the names in the questions from our public comments, and so we see you often, and so it's just another way to make sure that if you're sending an email, sometimes you'll just send it to my office, or you'll send it to all the council members. This is another way, another vehicle for you to get your thoughts and ideas and concerns heard. So in many ways, and there are a lot of people from District 10 who participate in public comment. If I were to share maybe a little bit of feedback, a bunch of people self-identify as which district they live in. If you're not already doing that, I would encourage you to do that, because I know that I pay more attention when someone is a direct constituent of mine, and I would imagine that it would be the same for other elected officials, my colleagues.
Thanks for that great perspective, Councilman Hines. Really appreciate it. So we have time for just a couple more questions, and we've got one from Jake here, who asks, when we say the districts have stayed at their current size, districts get redone if one district grows in population relative to others.
So, do you mind if I take this one? No. We're actually in a really fun time right now, because we're about to do redistricting. So the census happens every 10 years, unless you have a president like Donald Trump that defunds the census. But we'll get to that in a second. We do a census every 10 years, and then as soon as the census is complete, we redistrict. And we're at a really fun time, because we're finishing up the census. We're about to redistrict, and our two at-large members are both term limited. And so constituents each. And so there's the discussion right now, should we have 13 district council members instead of 11 and 2 at large? But we're at a friction point right now because the census isn't done, and so the state is having a hard time meeting its state constitutionally mandated deadlines because the census is halted. And we're a bit behind the state, but we're also starting to wonder and worry that because the census has been put on pause, that we're going to have concerns about redistricting too. But so I'm combining the question about reappropriation and some other questions about redistricting. But I think this is a really fun discussion, and it is part of the political process. We want to make sure that people have equal representation, and the census and the redistricting and reapportionment happens every 10 years to make sure that people are generally equally represented, or each elected official has about a similar number of constituents.
Thank you. And Councilman Hines, I also just want to read a comment that we got in the Q&A here, also from Jake. He says, Liz from Chris's team does an amazing job at responding, and Councilman Hines is a great champion of constituent communication in his office. So thank you. It's a great example of that. So we have time for, I think we can do 2 more questions. We've gotten this question a few different times here in the Q&A. Where does the downtown member partnership fall under agencies based on charter? I am actually not sure about that related to charter, but the downtown member partnership is its own nonprofit organization. We do oversee the downtown member business improvement district. That is a quasi-governmental entity that is approved by city council every 10 years. Is there anything else that Zach, Emily, or Donnie want to add to that?
I'll let John address it.
Yeah, I don't have anything particularly to add. Just as I mentioned earlier, any kind of work done between City Council and DDP often goes through biz. So yeah.
And that'd be the same for most improvement districts or small taxing entities. We go through that biz committee, which meets on Wednesdays, Wednesday afternoons.
Okay, thank you. And so as a final question, this one comes from Katie, and she asks, how can we as residents best help the city council team and our city council representatives best do their job? What can we do to support you all? We know you work hard.
I'll let the representative that's on the line answer that one.
No comment. Oh, just kidding. I mean, really, we want to. I was called. I mean, I was called to service. I was an unwitting elected official. The first, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, people asked me to become an elected official. I said no. But the reason why I finally said yes is because I wanted to serve. Public servant is, maybe some people might feel it's lip service, but I mean, I really believe that my role is to serve the public. And so we're doing, and actually to go back to that one question about the difference between, before elected official and actually being an elected official, I thought that government had all these supports, and I would come in at day one and they would say, how high do you want me to jump? And what actually happened is day one I came in and we had no desks, no phones, no computers, no nothing, and no one to help because we are our own offices, and so it was just like, huh. But so in many ways it's an opportunity, and so I've been working hard on finding ways to better get the message out from my office to the people, and vice versa, getting wisdom back from the people. And so one way you can help is if you have suggestions on ways that I can improve, or that if I'm your council member, we as an elected body can improve that process. It's my job to represent you, and so I want to make sure that I do that. So that's how you can help.
Thank you for that. And this is just about all the time we have. I think we could probably spend another 2 hours answering all of these really great questions. So if we just to your question, I will be sending out a follow-up email directly from my my email here at the partnership. So feel free to respond, and I will do my very best to connect you with the answer to your question. I want to give a really sincere thank you to Zach, John, and Councilman Hines and Emily for being on with us today. Really appreciate this thoughtful overview and just for everything that you do for our city. And thanks to everyone for participating. We really appreciate you engaging in City Live and look forward to hopefully seeing you soon. Have a wonderful rest of your week and a great weekend, everyone. Take care.
Thanks. See you guys on Monday night.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it, folks. The thing that I think is important about this is that the Downtown Denver Partnership is a quasi-governmental organization. They push ballot issues on the population. They push statutes. They have been in opposition of Initiative 300, or would have given unhoused people the same rights as constitutionally protected landowners. So this was an interesting day. And for whatever reason, my screen's not functioning very well. I need to definitely benefit from the cleansing of the computer, maybe a little bit more. The laptop All right, I somehow died in the middle of that. So, thanks for hanging out, folks. Broadcast ending.